All right, so now that we have this I/O thing set up for our server, we're going to see how to set it up for the front end. And of course, the front end will actually be initializing this interaction, and that's when we'll see this message here logged out, which is going to be pretty exciting, of course. Now, before we do that, though, there is just one last thing on the back end that I almost forgot about. Well, to be honest, I did forget about it until I started recording this video. Instead of saying app.listen here, you just have to change this to server.listen. Now, that might seem like a very small thing, but it's actually going to make the difference between the sockets working and not working. And I know that personally, I've spent quite a long time trying to figure out why on earth my WebSockets weren't working, and this was the fix to it. So anyway, let's open up our front end. Well, more accurately, let's open up a terminal to our front end first so that we can install this new package. What we're going to do is we're going to say npm install, and the package, as I mentioned, is called socket.io-client. So let's install that here, and that will allow us to initialize a socket connection with our backend from our React front end. All right, so now that that's installed, the next thing that we're going to do is go into our front end, and the main page that we're going to need this connection on is going to be our note detail page. So let's open that up here. And essentially, the way that we're going to do this is when the user first visits the note detail page, we're going to open up a connection to the server, right? We're going to open up a WebSocket connection with the server. And as the user makes changes to this, or as another user makes changes to a note's content, we're going to interact with that WebSocket connection. You'll see what I mean in just a minute here. But the first thing we're going to do is open up this connection with our server from this page. And the way we do that is, first of all, by importing the socket.io from the client-side package. So that's going to look like this. We're going to say import socket.io client from socket.io-client. It is kind of a weird package name, I've always thought, but anyway, that's the way it's written out. And the next thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to have our socket, right, the connection that we create inside our note detail page, we're going to have to store that as a state variable. So let's go down here, right? We'll do it right above where we store isEditing and that kind of stuff. So we'll say const socket and set socket rather equals use state. And this is going to start off as null, right? Before we've established the connection, it's just going to be, the socket here is just going to be null. So establishing this connection now is going to look a little bit like this. We're going to use a useEffect hook. So we're going to say useEffect, and inside here, we're going to define an asynchronous function, very similarly to the way that we've loaded data in the past. We're going to say const, and we'll just call this something connect to socket, and this is going to be async, as I said, and we're going to call that down here at the bottom. We'll say connect to socket, just like that. All right, and we're only going to want this to happen when we first come to the page, so the second argument to our useEffect hook here is going to be an empty array. All right, so now that we've done that, we're going to go up here, and inside this connect to socket function is where we're going to open up our connection. Now what this is going to look like, we're going to say const socket equals socket.io client. Okay, so this socket.io client thing is a function that we can call to establish a connection with our server's WebSocket. And the first argument here is going to be the URL of our server. Now, this has to be expressed as an IP address. So we're going to have to say http://127.0.0.1 and then port 8080. All right, we just have to do that because of some technical details behind the scenes, so don't worry too much about that for the time being. And now that we've established that connection, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to call set socket with this socket connection that we just established. Okay, so we'll say set socket, and we now have a connection there. Now, one last thing that we're going to want to do here in this useEffect hook is disconnect from this socket when the user navigates away from this page. And the way that we do that, you might remember, is going to be by saying return, and we're going to return socket.disconnect. And what that means in a useEffect hook is that this will be called when our component here unmounts. All right, so that should be all we really need to do to establish a WebSocket connection with our backend from our front end. So let's see what this is going to look like. Oh, and one other thing that I actually didn't realize is that this socket IO client thing is not asynchronous, which means what we can do is actually just remove these things here, have useEffect be synchronous, and that will actually work much better. So there we go. Let's start up our front end and back end now by using our start script, or dev script rather. We're going to say npm run dev and hit enter. And we should see that both our front end and back end start up correctly. You are going to want to verify that the back end starts up, right? That we didn't make some kind of a syntax error there or anything. So this should open up in the browser. There we go. And when we navigate to the note detail page now, we should see on the back end, right? We should see logged out from the back end that a new client has connected. So let's give this a try. We're going to click on one of our notes here. And if we go to the back end now, it looks like that didn't work quite the way we wanted it to. So let's check the inspector window here, see if there was any errors. Yes, and sure enough, we see that we're getting a CORS policy error. That's just because of how we're establishing this connection, right? We're not running this as if it were on the same origin. So the way that we fix this is by going to server.js, and when we create this new IO object, what we need to do is we need to enable CORS by passing a property called CORS with the property origin set to star and the property methods set to star as well. Basically, that will just allow the front end to connect to this. Now, this is not generally something you'll want to have in production, so make sure that if you're going to actually release this thing in a place where people are going to be accessing it and using it, make sure to walk through Socket.io's documentation for releasing this app. So anyway, that should at least make it possible for our front end to connect, so let's make sure that this restarted. And sure enough, what we're going to see logged out is that a new client has connected to our server. All right, now to make this a little bit more dramatic here, let's go back and do it again. All right, we're going to click on this note, and we'll see that that gets printed out again. So essentially, our server now is listening for new connections, and whenever one of those connections occurs, it executes this code inside of here. And as we're going to see shortly, this is the foundation for adding most of our other WebSocket functionality to our backend. So I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.